This week we're learning the Sikha of Shabbos Malchus Matos Masei of Tafshin Nun Aleph. The Sikha could be found in Sefer HaSichas Tafshin Nun Aleph, Chelik Beis, page 709. The Rebbe starts off the Sikha by saying that one of the special things about this Shabbos Kodesh is that we are finishing Sefer Bamidbar, the fourth Sefer of the Torah. By concluding this Sefer, in a certain sense, we're actually finishing the whole Torah. The first four Sfarim, that is because the fifth Sefer is called Mishnah Torah. Sefer Dvarim is called Mishnah Torah, which is really a repeat, that Moshe Rabbeinu is repeating things from the previous Sfarim. So in a certain sense, we're completing the main part of Torah after the Sefer. At the end of which we announce loudly and joyously, Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, which shows on, which indicates the strength, Chazak, the strength of Yidden in all matters of Torah. And in fact, the strength itself, the Chazak itself, is threefold. Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, 3 times Chazak. The advantage of 3 times, as we know, the Gemara tells us often that Betlas Zimne Have Chazaka, when something is done 3 times, so this is considered a chazakah. This is an extra special strength within this particular inyan. So here we have chazak, the strength itself, 3 times, which is a chazakah, once again, strength. So the Rebbe says we need to understand the connection between the end of the 4th Sefer in Torah to the time that we are in. Because we always finish this 4th Sefer, the Sefer of Bamidbar, we always finish it within the 3 weeks. And some years, like this year, it's also the first Shabbos of the 9 days. Now, seemingly, the time of the 3 weeks, and especially the 9 days, is a time of Churban and Golus. It would seem to be the opposite of strength, the opposite of Chazak. It seems to be a time that represents weakness in matters of holiness, the exact opposite of Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. Now, seemingly, you could say that's exactly the point. Since we're holding in a time that's an all-time low, down, a weakness in Kedusha, that's why there's a need for Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. The Yidden need to be strengthened. But the Rebbe says it is more likely, and it makes more sense to say, that the strength itself is coming from the time. It's not that the strength is something that's needed because of the time. So in other words, the time is a time that represents weakness, and the Chazak is something of the opposite, coming to strengthen us. Rather, it makes sense to say that somehow this time itself, that we are reading the Chazak, that itself represents a certain strength. And in fact, the Rebbe says this is emphasized by the way we refer to this Shabbos. Now, the name of everything, as we know, indicates and shows what the thing is all about. We refer to this Shabbos as Shabbos Chazak. In other words, we're saying that this Shabbos, a Shabbos within the 3 weeks, a Shabbos within the 9 days, and yet we're saying this is a Shabbos of strength of our avodah, of strength of Torah. We are finishing a whole inyan in Torah, the 4 Sfarim of Torah, Torah and mitzvahs, and we are saying this is a Shabbos that represents strength in all of these inyanim. So of course this is what we need to understand. How does this strength of this Shabbos fit together with what would seem to be the opposite, the message of the 3 weeks and the 9 days? Says the Rebbe in Seif Beis. We're going to understand this by first explaining the connection between Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek to the Parsha in which we finish the Sefer of Dvarim, and we say Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. Now, of course, this year we have 2 Parshiyos together. It's Parshiyos Matos and Masei. So if we say Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, one Chazak, the Rebbe explains, is for Parshas Matos. There's a Chazak, a special strength to do with Parshas Masei, and then there is the Chazak of combining Matos and Masei together. Now the Rebbe asks and says that it would seem to be that Chazak, and especially a triple Chazak, would fit more with the idea of Matos rather than Masei. Why is that? Mate, which means a stick or a staff, represents a strength, that something that doesn't budge, that doesn't move, similar to the idea of a mate, in the literal sense, that it's something very hard and very strong. In fact, the word mata often represents an expression of rulership. The pasuk says, Matos ois el shevet moishlim, which means very, very strong rods, strong sticks for the scepters of rulers. So that's what a mata is all about. It's a strong stick, and not only that, one that represents the strength of rulership. So that is matos. That fits with the idea of chazak, of being strong. On the other hand, Masei is about journeying and moving, as in the pasuk Vayisa goimer holoich v'nosoya, pasuk about Avraham Avinu that kept on moving and traveling. It's about moving from one place to the other. You're not settled and staying in one place in a strong way. Rather, moving from one place to the other. In fact, real Masei would mean that you're completely being uprooted from the previous place and moving to a place that's incomparable to the previous place. So that shows on movement, on flexibility, which would seem to be the exact opposite of the strength of the chazak, which chazak you would assume means something that stands in one place and standing strong and doesn't move. But says the Rebbe, from the fact that we announce chazak v'neschazek at the end of Parshas Masei, now that's true whether Masei is by itself or whether Matos and Masei are together. The chazak is always announced at the end of Masei. That tells us that really the chazak, the strength, is particularly connected to Masei. It's only sometimes Matos is also joined with Masei. So in order to understand this, the Rebbe explains in Seif Gimel. And the Rebbe says as follows. The idea of chazaka is, as we said before, when you have something three times, that's considered a chazaka, something that's strong, something that doesn't move, something that's not to be changed. Especially when you have three times chazaka, three times chazak v'nischazek. So that emphasizes that the strength is so powerful, is so strong, is that even when you have opposition, and yet nothing moves and nothing changes. And the Rebbe explains by explaining the numbers 1, 2, and 3. The Rebbe says the number 1 usually represents a situation when there's one and only. There's a situation of kedusha. There's no opposition. There's nothing getting in the way. So that is what the number 1 represents. There's only one choice and one option. The number 2 represents that there's already division. There's already room for dispute. There's already room for separation. Because there's already some sort of opposition. There's something besides the one. There's 2. Then there's the number 3. And the number 3 represents that there's, as we said before, 3 represents a chazaka. 3 represents something strong and powerful. That is, that even in a situation where there is opposition, yet the kedusha stands strong, the kedusha lasts, and as we'll see in a moment, this itself can be in a number of different ways. But that's what the number 3 represents, a strength of kedusha, even when there is opposition. The Rebbe explains this idea of the number 3, the strength, even when there is opposition, this itself could be in 2 ways. The first way is what's called in the Sikha, what Chassidus refers to, coming from the Elyon, from the perspective of, and from the standpoint of Kedusha. Because there's such a powerful and great and strong level of Kedusha that's coming down, milmayla lamata, from above to below, it comes everywhere, affects everything, even where there is opposition. And that is because it's bli gvul, without any limit. Therefore, even in a place of opposition, it could also shine and nothing gets in the way. That's one way how it could be. There's another way that's called mitzad hatachton, coming from below. In other words, we're elevating the world, elevating the things of the world, in a way that not only are we getting rid of opposition, but we're actually transforming the opposition to Kedusha. So again, we have the number 1. 1 represents when there's just Kedusha. The number 2 represents that there's already something else besides for Kedusha. There seems to be some sort of opposition. The number 3 is coming and telling us that we're taking the opposition itself, and even when there's opposition, the Oira Kedusha could deal with it, could stand strong, and even transform it. But this itself we explained in 2 different ways. Either that the Oira Kedusha from Lamaila is coming down so strong, or that the Tachton is being elevated. These two different ways of dealing with the opposition is represented in the idea of the chazak of Parshas Matos and Masei. The chazak, the strength of Parshas Matos, is telling us about a strength that's coming mitzad ha'elyon, coming from Hashem. As the pasuk starts off by saying, "Vayedaber Moshe," Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the leaders of the Matos. That's literally the leaders of the Shvatim, and he says, "Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem." This is what Hashem commanded. In other words, we're speaking about the strength of Hashem's words that come along even in a place of opposition. The words of Hashem are powerful and strong and permeate everything. That's what Matos represents. Masei represents, on the other hand, the strength that's coming from the Tachton, from the lowly world being elevated. This is seen in the pasuk, Eile Masei b'nei Yisrael asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim. These are the journeys of the Yidden when they leave Mitzrayim. In other words, we're speaking about the avodah of the Yidden in elevating the world, that notwithstanding all of the changes, notwithstanding all of the different levels that are within these various different journeys in the Midbar, in the level of the Tachton, in accordance to the level of the Tachton, in other words, we're dealing with the menagid, with the opposition, we're dealing with it and we're elevating it. So notwithstanding all of the opposition, we are constantly moving and journeying from those limitations from the Tachton, and we are traveling further and further to Eretz Yisrael, to the real place of expanse of Kedusha. So again, Matos, which represents that this is the word of Hashem coming down in any situation. Masei represents that we may be dealing with a Tachton, we're journeying through a midbar, a place of problems, and yet we're journeying and moving further and further towards Kedusha, elevating everything on the way. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the connection between Chazak and Masei specifically, because this strength, in a place where there is opposition, the strength is even more felt when we're dealing with the Tachton, when we're elevating the lowly place, which, as we said, is hinted in Masei b'nei Yisrael asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim, the Yidden journeying from Mitzrayim, traveling through these lowly places and continuing to travel, transforming everything, that not only is the Oira Kedusha so strong and it could shine everywhere, notwithstanding the opposition, but even furthermore, we're dealing with the menagid, we're dealing with the opposition, we're nullifying it, or even more than that, transforming into Kedusha, and that obviously is a much greater strength, a much greater Chiddush. Now obviously, the real shleimus, the most perfect way of Chazak, is when we could combine both advantages of Matos and Masei together. What does it mean, both advantages? The advantage of Matos is that if it's coming from above, from the oir of Hashem, the strength of Hashem, obviously it's coming beyond limitation, higher than limitation. The problem, however, is, since it's only coming from the Elyon, from the Eibishter's perspective and point of view, it's not really dealing so much with the Tachton, the Menaged, the opposition. In fact, we're not even taking into consideration the Tachton. So it has that problem that the Tachton itself is not really being completely transformed. It's only the Oira Kedusha is so powerful it's reaching even there. The advantage of Masei has the advantage of transforming the Menagid, of transforming the lowly world and the opposition. But the problem is it's lacking the Bligvul aspect of the Elyon. So therefore it's possible that it could eventually stop, it could eventually change, and so on. And therefore the real Chazak, the real benefit and the best way of the proper strength is when you have Matos and Masei together. That is, you have both advantages, the strength coming from the oil, from the light way, it's higher than limitation, and the strength coming from transforming the opposition by elevating the Tachton. And of course, when you have both of these together, so then what you get is, you're transforming and nullifying the Menagid, the opposition, by elevating it, but it's also in an everlasting and in an eternal way. So just let's summarize this last point, because it's quite relevant also for the further part of the Sikha. What the Rebbe is explaining is that Matos and Masei, each one represent a certain strength. Matos, which means a staff, also represents a staff of a ruler, a scepter. and it's a strong stick that is not flexible. Matos represents that strength that's coming from the Eibishter, the Oira Kedusha shining into the world. Masei is the Yidden's journeys, going from Mitzrayim, from a lowly place, going higher and higher, getting closer and closer to Kedusha, representing transforming the Tachtoin and bringing it up higher. And the proper strength is when you have both of these advantages together, Matos and Masei. The Rebbe also said, and this is very important, that this is all connected to the number of 3. The Rebbe said that generally when we have the number 1, 1 represents that there's only Kedusha, there's nothing else in the picture at all. 2 represents that there is already a certain division, and 3 is when the 2 could come and join together, and we could take the opposition itself and bring it closer to Kedusha. In the next part of the Sikha, the Rebbe is going to be dealing with the numbers of 4 and 5. And this is going to be based on a continuation to the previous point, where the Rebbe is going to speak about that the idea of 4 is a step even higher than 3, more removed from this division of a Elyon and a Tachton and so on, and then the number 5 even beyond that. So the Rebbe says in Seif Daled, V'yesh lo if we could add, that this connection between Matos and Masei in the Aliyus of the Torah that happens in Revi'i. By Revi'i we read the end of Parshas Matos and we begin Parshas Masei. And that causes the real chazak. We said Matos and Masei, when they are together, that is the real strength. So where is the chazak really happening? Where is that strength being represented? In the Aliyah of Revi'i that's combining the Parsha of Matos and Parshas Masei. So it's Revi'i, it's about the number 4. Also, which Sefer are we concluding over here when we say Chazak? It's also the 4th Sefer of the Torah, Sefer Revi'i, Chumash Bamidbar. And the Rebbe explains, even though we just said that the number 3 represents Chazaka, strength, and even in a situation where there's opposition, nevertheless, since the number 3 is coming, following right after 1 and 2, it shows that the number 3 is still a little bit connected to the previous situation. In other words, even though it is combining the Elyon with the Tachton, the number 1, and the opposition from number 2, nevertheless it still felt that there's 2 things that need to be combined. There's an Elyon, there's a Tachton, there's a higher, there's a lower, and they need to be combined. Says the Rebbe, where's the real strength? They feel that's the Elyon and the Tachtin both together, without any division at all. That's represented in Revi'i in the number 4. In other words, the number 4 means that it's already a new level, a completely new level, not in continuation to numbers 1 and 2, which that would have been number 3. Rather, Revi'i is a level beyond even the 3. And the Rebbe calls it over here Shleimus Hayis Yashvus, like something that's completely settled. The Rebbe gives an example. When you have a chair, the chair has 4 legs. That is obviously a more permanent, proper seat and chair than a chair that only has a seat that only has 3 legs. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying is that the number 4 represents a chazaka, a strength, in a way that's permanent, like a chair of 4 legs that's standing in a permanent way, in an everlasting way. The Rebbe moves on and says that this is even more so in the connection that we see, that we move from Revi'i, from number 4, we move to number 5. That is, in Parshas Matos Masei, on the Shabbos when we finish the 4th Sefer of the Torah, we immediately move on. In Mincha we start right away the 5th Sefer of the Torah, Sefer Dvarim. In fact, the Rebbe says this year there's a special chidush in all of this, because we finished the Sefer Revi'i. Not only are we moving right away to the Sefer Chamishi, and that way the number 4 is connected to the number 5, but we are finishing the 4th Sefer of the Torah in the 5th month, the month of Av. Not like some years where we read Matos and Masei and Shabbos Mevorchim Av, which is still in Chodesh Tammuz. This year we are reading it in Chodesh HaChamishi. What is the significance of Chamishi? So it's known that Chamishi shows on a very high level that's completely beyond limitations, completely beyond the order of Ishtalshalus, as hinted in the Pasuk, HaChamishis Leparoi. So just by way of a short explanation, this is not in the Sikha itself, but this is in many other Sikhas of the Rebbe, based on a Zoyar. So we have a pasuk. This is in Parshas Vayigash, where Yosef is giving his decree of how things are going to work in Mitzrayim, what belongs to the people, what belongs to Paroi, and so on and so forth. So the pasuk over there is speaking about how 4 parts will go, 4 parts of the fields and the produce and so on belong to the people, to the Koyanim, and then it says V'hachamishis, and a 5th needs to be given to Paroi. 20% needs to be given to Paroi. But Chassidus understands that, the Zohar understands that the word Paroi, besides meaning physically the king Paroi, also refers to a very, very high darga up above. Paroi is from the word the isperiyu v'isgalyon minei kol noidin. Paroi could also mean an expression of uncovering, the level from where all oiros, from where all spiritual lights originate and are uncovered, are revealed. So what does hachamishis leparoi then mean? That the 5th level, that is shaychus to Paroi. In other words, you have the regular 4 levels of Seder Ishtalshalos. Again, this is not in the Sikha itself, but 4 would often be like the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzira, Asiyah. Chamishis is a level beyond all of that. In our Neshama, we know there's the 4 levels of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya, and Yechidah is the 5th level. So this is Hachamishis Leparoi. The 5th level represents a level that's completely beyond Ishtalshalos. Back to our Sikha. So therefore, Davka, this special koyach of the number 5, has the power to combine the 2 opposites of Hamshacha and Ha'alav, that which is drawn down from above, and that which is elevated from below, like the idea of Matos and Masei that we said before, and also that Chazaka that we said, which is connected with the number of 3, by combining the 1 and 2 together in the most perfect way. So again, just to summarize the point that Ebba was saying, is that the number 1 represents Kedusha on its own without any opposition. The number 2 represents that there's already a world, there's already something outside of the world of Kedusha. 3 represents that there's a combination between the 2, that the 2 could come together. And that, the Rebbe said, is the idea of Chazaka and the idea of Matos and Masei. The number 4, the Rebbe says, which is the 4th Sefer Bamidbar, as well as the combination happened within Revi. The number 4, says the Rebbe, since it's already beyond the 3, what it shows is that there's, in this level of Revi, it's not even noticeable anymore, that there's a difference between the Elyon and the Tachton. They became so united together, you can't even recognize a difference between the 2. All of this comes b'koyach of number 5, which is even higher than all of that. 5 is a chamishis lepari, the level that's beyond ishtalshalus, that gives the koyach to combine even the opposites. The number of 5 again is, first of all, the fact that we're moving into Sefer Dvarim, and second of all, the fact that we are in Chodesh Menachemov. Says the Rebbe in Seifei, now we can understand the connection between Chazak v'Nischazik for the 4th Sefer that we finish in Parshas Matos Masei to the time of the 3 weeks, and this year even in the 9 days. So again, we asked a question in the beginning of the Sikha, that it seems to be a time of weakness, it seems to be a time of problems. How can you tell me this is a time of strength, of Chazak? So now the Rebbe is coming to explain this. But by first prefacing, the whole point of the Churban and the Golus, which is the idea of the 3 weeks, as we know, is all in order to come to the greatest benefit and advantage of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, the Geula HaAsida, the future Geula, etc. This Maila, this Shleimus, the special inyan of the Geula, is also seen in the number 3, in the idea of a Chazaka. Because of course we're going to be having the 3rd Beis HaMikdash and the 3rd Geula. What's the idea of number 3 in the context of the Beis HaMikdash? The Rebbe explains the advantage of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash. The Pasuk says, Mikdash Adnai Koinonu Yadecha. This is the Beis HaMikdash that Hashem makes. And it says Yodecha in the plural with 2 hands. As Rashi explains, this is referring to the time when Hashem Yimloich Loilam Voed, when Hashem will rule forever. This is speaking about the time of Mashiach, in the time when the entire power of ruling is going to be seen that it's all Hashem's. But we say this already by the Shiras Hayam, this is said in Oz Yashir, because already then, if things would have been the way they're supposed to be, so right away then they would have had the Beis HaMikdash when they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael immediately if everything would have worked out. As the Razal tells us, Ilu Zachu Yisrael, if the Yidden would have merited, as soon as they came up from the Yam, they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael. Then, going into Eretz Yisrael through Moshe would have been an eternal goal, after which there is no golus. And we would have had the everlasting Beis HaMikdash, after which there would have been no Churban. Says the Rebbe, since we know that all matters of Torah are true and everlasting and eternal, even things in Torah that are just brought as a thought, a kasalka daitach, when Torah says something could have been and should have been, like in our case we say, ilu zachu, if the Yidden would have merited, says the Rebbe, but since everything is emes and everlasting, so the truth of the matter is that even right now, after we did have a Churban, and we are in Golus, the truth of the matter is, there is always this eternal Geula and eternal Beis HaMikdash, and in a strong way. The problem, however, is that it's a strength that's only mitzad ha'elyon, only, so to speak, from the perspective of Elikus. In the Tachtoin world, in the world that we are in, there seems to be a situation of Churban and Golus. And therefore, obviously, we don't have it fully and completely because there is lacking the Tachtoin aspect. On the other hand, of course, the Tachtoin itself is also not good enough. The strength from the Tachtoin is also not good enough because we have our limitations. And therefore, things cannot be in an eternal way if it's only coming mitzad the Tachtoin. And therefore, we need to have both advantages together. Again, the strength coming mitzad l'mayla, from the Eibishter, the Geula and the Beis HaMikdash coming from above, as well as the Yidden's avodah down below. Only in that way could you have an eternal Geula and an eternal Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe explains in Seif Vav that these are the differences between the various different Batei Mikdash that we have. The first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, the first Geula and the second Geula, are, as we're going to see in a minute, representing these two different ideas between the Elyon and the Tachtin. And then finally we have the third Geula, the Geula, which is going to be the eternal Geula. So the first Beis HaMikdash, similar to the number one, it was a Beis HaMikdash built by Shlomo HaMelech. As the Pasuk says regarding Shlomo, Vayeshiv Shlomo al Kisei Hashem, he's sitting on the throne of Hashem. This represents a tremendous level of Kedusha coming from above. This is more like the Avodah of Tzadikim. But since it's not so much connected to the Tachtoin, to the world being elevated and so on, well, that wasn't enough. There was a Churban, there was a destruction, and there was an interruption to all of this. The second Beis HaMikdash, which represents like similar to the number two, this represents more the Tachtoin. This was built when the Yidden came up from Bavel in the time of Ezra. This was more related to the Tachtoin. This is more about the Yidden going milmato l'mayla, being involved in building the Beis HaMikdash, and in a situation where they needed more like the idea of avodas hatshuva. It was already after a churban and so on. They're returning to Eretz Yisrael, and that's why this is a Beis HaMikdash that has more to do with the world. In fact, this is why, from the perspective of the world, this was a greater Beis HaMikdash. As the Pasuk says, because it was a bigger structure and it stood for more years. But on the other hand, because it's only from the Tachtoin, it's only from down below, so it also has its limitations, and that's why it too was destroyed. And in fact, so much of a greater and longer churban and interruption than from the first Beis HaMikdash. In addition to that, even during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, it didn't have the advantages of the first Beis HaMikdash. As we know, there were 5 very, very important and main things missing in the second Beis HaMikdash. So the first Beis HaMikdash has the Maila of the Kedusha coming mitzad the Elyon. The second Beis HaMikdash has the Maila of the Tachtoin. It stands for longer, it's a bigger structure. But both of those were destroyed. The Chiddush of the third Beis HaMikdash, the third Geula, the number 3, is that here we have the combination of both advantages together. Both the Elyon and the Tachtoin, and this is why it's going to be in the greatest strength and eternal, as we say about the Geula Hasidah, that's when we're going to sing a Shir Chodosh. Now usually it says Shira in the feminine, here it says in the masculine term, because it's referring to a strong and powerful Geula and an eternal Beis HaMikdash, after which there is no Churban. Says the Rebbe, just like we said before, when we're speaking about the number 3, that the highlights of the idea of the chazaka are even more seen in the number 4 and in the number 5, in a similar way regarding the third Beis HaMikdash and the third Geula, which represents combining the Elyon and the Tachton. So often, or sometimes this Geula is also called the fourth Geula, and sometimes even the fifth Geula. As the Rebbe explains or clarifies in the footnote over here, in footnote number 33, the Rebbe says that we know that in a number of Medrashei Chazal, Golus Mitzrayim is counted amongst what's known as the 4 Golios, the 4 exiles. In some Medrashei Chazal, there are 4 exiles besides for Golus Mitzrayim. The Rebbe says this is also why the Geula Hasidah is sometimes counted as the 4th Geula or even as the 5th Geula. So it all depends how we're counting the various different Golios. But this is what the Rebbe is saying. So sometimes we refer to it as a 3rd Geula. Sometimes we're referring to it even as the 4th or as the 5th, because the 5th, as we said before, represents a whole new higher level, which is completely not related to the previous levels. And as we said, this is the darga that represents that it's completely higher than the Elyon and the Tachton, and that's why it could combine both ideas together. Says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin, this is specifically emphasized in Shabbos Chazak when we're finishing the 4th Sefer. In the 3 weeks, when we are announcing Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazik, this triple Chazaka. In Shabbos Parshas Matos Masei, what's being hinted is the Chazaka of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, of the 3rd Geula, which comes after and through the combination of the 1st and 2nd Beis HaMikdash. After we had the interruption of their Churban in the 3 weeks, by combining the 2 milas of the 2 advantages of the 1st Beis HaMikdash and the 2nd Beis HaMikdash, the Elyon and the Tachton, that which is being drawn down from above, and that which is coming up from below, as is hinted in the ideas of Matos Masei. So again, what the Rebbe is saying is, we asked a question previously that it seems to be a time of Bein Hamtzarim of the 3 weeks. What's the idea of the Chazaka that we're speaking about over here? And this is what the Rebbe is saying, exactly the opposite. We know the whole idea of the Churban was to bring about the Maila of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, and that's exactly what Matos and Masei is saying. We're putting together both advantages of the 1st Beis HaMikdash and the 2nd Beis HaMikdash. Again, Matos being more similar to the 1st Beis HaMikdash. The Elyon being drawn down, Masei being more like the Tachton being elevated. We're putting them both together. And this is the advantage of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash. And where does this happen, says the Rebbe, in Revi. And furthermore, we are finishing the 4th Sefer and right away going by Mincha into the 5th Sefer, which, as we said, this represents a level that's completely beyond the Elyon and the Tachton. That is what shows and emphasizes the combination between the Elyon and the Tachton by the Beis HaMikdash, the future Beis HaMikdash by the Geula Hasidah. Says the Rebbe V'yesh Loimar that these numbers that are connected to the Beis HaMikdash Ha'asid and the Geula Hasidah are also emphasized in the time when we are reading Parshas Matos Masei and we're announcing Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazik. The Rebbe says, again, looking at these numbers, so we are saying Chazak on the 4th Sefer. This is happening in the 3 weeks. What did we say 3 represents? The 3 represents the advantage of the 3rd Beis HaMikdash, the 3rd Geula. It's happening in the 4th month, in those years when Matos Masei are read in the end of Tammuz, it's read in the 4th month, in Tammuz. And, which is similar to the idea we said before, when sometimes our Geula is called the Geula HaRevi, it's the 4th Geula, or this year we are reading it actually in the beginning of Chodesh of the 5th month, which, as we said before, represents a level of the Geula HaChamishis, sometimes referred to as the 5th Geula. Says the Rebbe, this is the chazak, this is the chizuk, this is the strength for all matters of Torah and mitzvahs, especially regarding all of our avodah that we've been doing in the time of Golus after the Churban and Golus of the 3 weeks. Because Davka, through this we come to the strength of the Geula HaMitis V'Ashleima, the eternal Geula and the eternal Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe in Ifches, An additional thing that's connected to this Shabbos, an Erev Shabbos, and as we know, Misha Torach be'Erev Shabbos, Yoichel b'Shabbos, the one who prepares, works on Erev Shabbos, has what to eat on Shabbos, which generally represents the idea that the Inyanim of Erev Shabbos prepare for Shabbos. So, Erev Shabbos was Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. What's Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av? The Pasuk says clearly in our Parsha, in Parshas Masei, that Aaron HaKohen went up to Hoira Har, and that's where he passed away, as the Pasuk says, B'Chodesh HaChamishi, the 5th month, that's the month of Av, Be'echad LaChodesh, on the first day of the month. Rosh Chodesh Av is the yard side, the Yom Hilula of Aaron HaKohen. The Rebbe says, by first prefacing, that this idea that a day of a yard site and a day of passing should be mentioned in Torah Shebeksav, as in this case, B'Chodesh HaChamishi, Be'echad LaChodesh, is actually a Chidush. It's something that we don't find anywhere in all of Torah. Not by Moshe Rabbeinu, not by their sister Miriam, not by the three Avos. This is the only place we find a date when someone passed away. Says the Rebbe, it makes sense that in the Teichen of the day, if we look at what this day is all about, again, the 5th month, the first day, so somehow this hints to the general avodah of Aaron HaKohen, and that's why it's on this particular day that was the culmination of all of his avodah, as the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, that all the maisim and Torah and avodah of a tzaddik that he did in his whole life is all revealed and shining down and achieving salvation in this world on that day that he passes away. So what is the significance of Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av, and how is that connected to the special avodah of Aaron HaKohen? Says the Rebbe in Seif Tes. The special union of Aaron HaKohen we could actually learn from the day of when he actually passed away, the day that his avodah was complete. The pasuk says, "Vayiru kol ha'edu," and all the Yidden saw that Aaron passed away. So the Yidden were crying for 30 days. The pasuk says, "Kol Beis Yisrael." As Rashi explains to us, and Chazal tell us that this was the men and the women. Everyone was crying for Aaron because he was the Oyev Shalom, the Roidev Shalom. He was the one that pursued peace and brought love and peace between people and so on. As the Mishnah says, Oyev Shalom, V'Roidev Shalom, Oyev is Habriya, is a Mekarvon La Torah. That is the way to be a Talmud of Aaron HaKohen. In continuation to that, the pasuk says, Vayishma Knani, the Knani heard. What did he hear? So as Rashi tells us, he heard that Aaron passed away, and because of that, the Anane HaKavod, the clouds of glory, have parted, have gone away. In a similar thing in this week's Parsha, it also says, in continuation to the passing of Aaron, Vayishma Knani, again Chazal tell us, L'lametcha, to teach you that the passing of Aaron, what did they hear? It's that the Anane HaKavod was suddenly not protecting the Yidden anymore. What's the connection between these two things that are emphasized when Aaron passes away by the completion of his avodah? In other words, what's the connection between the idea of the Roidev Shalom, the fact that everyone cried because he was the one that pursued peace, and the fact that the Anane HaKavod went away? So the Rebbe explains, we could say the following. The special advantage of the Anane HaKavod that were there b'schus Aaron, if we compare that in contrast to the mun and the water that were given to the Yidden in the schus of Moshe and Miriam. So the difference is the mun, as we know, was given in a limited way. There was a certain amount for each person, one oimer for each person. The water, even though there's no limit to how much water the Yidden were able to have, nevertheless, it was also divided. Every person had his share of water. Every Yid drinks how much water he needs to drink. Whereas the Anane HaKavod surround all the Yidden equally without any division. They are surrounding and protecting all Yidden equally. That, says the Rebbe, is exactly the same point of Oyev Shalom, V'Roidev Shalom. Oyev is Habriya, Mekarvon La Torah. In other words, emphasizing the Achdus of Yidden, that point of Yidden, the way they are, beyond separation, beyond division. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud, this is also hinted in the name Aharon. How is it hinted in the name Aaron? So the Rebbe looks at the few different letters within the word Aaron. So first the Rebbe looks at the Hey Reish in the middle of the word. Har in Chassidus, in many places, a mountain generally represents an abundance of love. That's what Har usually represents. The Aleph in the beginning of Aaron represents where is the Ahar, where is that love coming from? So the word Aleph, that Aleph, if you look at the spelling of the word Aleph, it has the same letters as the word Pele. So in many places in Chassidus, again, it explains that the level of Aleph represents a level of Pele, a level of wonder, a level that's beyond Hishtalshalus. So again, the Aleph represents Pele, a wonder, something very, very high, and that's where the Ahava is coming from. And because it's coming from such a high level, that's why it's not just an ordinary Ahava, but it's Ahava Rabbah, a very great level of Ahava. In fact, the Rebbe explains that's one of the differences between Avraham and Aaron, even though both of them really represent kindness and Ahava and love and so on. Nevertheless, in other places it explains that the Ahava of Avraham is still within some sort of limit of Seder Ishtalshalus, whereas the Ahava of Aaron is that which is beyond Seder Ishtalshalus. Says the Rebbe, this idea of Ahava Rabbah, of the great Ahava of Aaron, is also hinted in the order of the letters of the word Aaron. And the Rebbe gives an explanation, another explanation of how we can understand the letters of the word Aaron. So first we have Aleph Hey, which we could say, the Rebbe says, is a Rosh Tevis for the word Ahava. Aleph Hey is for Ahava. The Aleph for Ahava and the Hey for, Ahava. Aleph Hey is Ahava, then the Reish is for Rabbah, so Ahava Rabbah. And then finally we have the final Nun, the Lange Nun, which a Nun, that Nun represents that this Ahava is being drawn down lower and lower. That means to say it's reaching even to Yidden that are on a very, very lowly level. Why is that represented by that final Nun? Similar to the Oisius HaTorah, we know that there's three kinds of letters. There is the letters that are within the line. There is letters that go above the line, higher. A lamed, for example. The Rebbe doesn't give the example right over here, but sticks up above the line, and then you have the letters that stick down beneath the line. Similarly, in Yidden, the Yidden are compared to the letters of the Torah, as it's known that the word Yisrael itself is a Rosh Tevis. Yei shishim ribui oisius LaTorah. There are 600,000 letters to the Torah. So there is Yidden that are, so to speak, below the line. Aaron's Ahava reaches down to that Nun, even below the line, even to those lowest levels. So the idea over here is that the level of Aaron is the level that's beyond division, and therefore he can combine all of the levels of the Yidden equally. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud Aleph. More specifically, within the idea of Aaron is also emphasized the Achdus, that connection also between these two ideas that we spoke about before of Hamshach, of drawing down from above, and Hala, bringing up from below, similar to when we spoke about the idea of Matos and Masei. And Aaron is doing this again because of a koyach that's really higher than any sorts of division of Elyon and Tachton. How do we see that? So we know one of the main inyanim of Aaron HaKoyen is the idea of Birchas Koyanim. Now, before discussing Birchas Koyanim, just to point out over here in the footnote also on Hara 54, the Rebbe right away connects this again to the idea of Ahava. In the bracha that is said before Birchas Koyanim, so it says Asher Kedushanu B'Kedushasei Shel Aharon. So first of all, Aaron specifically is the one that represents this idea of Birchas Koyanim. But what does it say further? Levarech es Amo Yisrael Bi Ahava. So it's all about the love. So what's the mitzvah of Birchas Koyanim? The mitzvah of Birchas Koyanim is that the Koyanim need to bench the Yidden every single day, b'nesiyas kapayim, with raising their hands. And this is a mitzvah that applies in all times, even in Chutz La'aretz. Chutz La'aretz, we have Birchas Koyanim every Yom Tif. In Eretz Yisrael, many communities have it every single day. And it's also every single tefillah of the day besides for Mincha, because there's a concern if a Kohen would have had a drink beforehand, etc. What is the idea of Birchas Koyanim? Birchas Koyanim is also a bracha that combines two things together, similar to what we were speaking about. There's an idea of bracha and an idea of tefillah. What is a bracha? Bracha is usually drawing down something great from above. Tefillah, on the other hand, is the Yid trying to get himself closer and closer to Hashem, that is, going up above. What's Birchas Koyanim? It's both together. It's both a bracha and a tefillah, because it is something that's higher than division between Maila and Mata, and therefore it could combine both things together. Says the Rebbe, this idea that it's combining these two ideas of the Maila and the Mata, like the bracha and the tefillah, and that it's happening through the number 3, which is higher than both together, is hinted in the fact that Birchas Koyanim is also known as a bracha mishuleshes, as a triple bracha. Right? We have the 3 psukim within Birchas Koyanim itself. Says the Rebbe, al derech haremez, in a way of a hint, we could also explain that this is hinted in the years, in the age of Aaron when he passes away. The pasuk says, "Va'Aaron ben shalish v'esrim u'ma'as shana b'moisei be'rahar." He was 123 years old when he passed away on Hoirahar. That is, the regular shleimus, complete years of a person is 120 years. Like by Moshe Rabbeinu that it says, Moshe Rabbeinu said, today my years are complete, when he was 120 years old, as the pasuk says, V'hayu yom of me'av esrim shana, the years usually of life is 120 years. What does Aaron live? 123 years. He lives another 3 years. This extra 3 years, in addition to the shleimus of the 120, are hinting to his avodah of combining these 2 ideas of Maila and Mata through the number 3, which is higher than both of them together. Says the Rebbe, now we could also explain the connection between Aaron's passing and the day when he passed away, B'chodesh HaChamishi, in the 5th month, B'echad LaChodesh. Chodesh HaChamishi, as we explained before at length, is connected to this number 5, which is higher than any sort of division that's within Seder Ishtalshalos. Like we said, HaChamishis LaParoi, the level from where all Oiros are coming from and being revealed. So that's Chodesh HaChamishi, a level that's beyond Ishtalshalos, beyond division. Echad LaChodesh, and the first day of the month within the 5th month, represents the level of Achdus, of Echad, of unity, that which is again higher than division, as is also emphasized in the fact that it's Rosh Chodesh, one day that's higher than division, and that includes all the days of the month. Says the Rebbe V'yashloimar, that by the fact that the Torah writes specifically and clearly that the passing of Aaron, the time when he finishes his avodah, was b'chodesh hachamishi, b'echad lachodesh, this is hinting to the whole avodah that he was involved with in his whole life. It was all about a level of echad, of unity, that's higher than division, that's uniting all sorts of levels, both as far as the combination and connection between the avodas of Hamshacha and Ha'Allah by Birchas Koyanim, as well as amongst the Yidden themselves, combining all the different levels of Yidden, which is emphasized through the Anani HaKavod, which surrounded all the Yidden equally, and in a special avodah of Oyev Shalom and Roidev Shalom, that all of this is done through a level that's completely beyond any division, like the level that we said before, which is hinted in the number 5, even further removed from the number 3 and 4, as we said before, which still in some way are connected to the 2 kavim, to the 2 different modes. The number 5 represents something that's beyond all of them. So again, the point is, B'chodesh HaChamishi B'echad LaChodesh, that because of coming from this idea of Chamishi, of something that's beyond all of Seder Ishtalshalos, he brings in the Echad, the Achdus in all matters of Avodah and of Yidden, etc. Says the Rebbe, the Chodesh HaChamishi B'echad LaChodesh, this 5th month, and the first day of the month that includes the whole month, so the Chodesh Avav, is also Ha'achana for the general Avodah of what we're heading to in Chodesh Elul, Ani L'doidi V'doidi Li. Here again we have these 2 ideas. One is Mulmato L'mayla, Ani L'doidi, the Yid coming closer to the Eibishter. There's Doidi Li, Hashem drawing down, coming down to the Yid. That all starts in Rosh Chodesh Elul, Ani L'doidi, and continues. The Doidi Li is mainly in Chodesh Tishrei. But again, here we are coming from the Nekuda of Achdus, of unity that's beyond division. That's what B'chodesh HaChamishi B'echad LaChodesh represents. That could help combine both ideas of Ani L'doidi and V'doidi Li. Or more specifically, the 2 levels of Ava. Mulmato L'mayla, Mulmayla L'mato, the Ani L'doidi V'doidi Li, because doidi, my beloved, refers to the idea of Ava. So how do we have the 2 levels of Ani L'doidi V'doidi Li, the avodah of Elul and Tishrei? That's coming after we have first the avodah of Ava Rabbah, that's higher than Ishtalshalos. The level of Aaron, the chesed of Aaron, who passes away B'chodesh HaChamishi B'echad LaChodesh. That then gives us the koiches to move on to the months of Elul and Tishrei, of the avodah of Ani L'doidi and V'doidi Li. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud Gimel, from the practical oirois from all of the above mentioned, standing in Shabbos Chazak of the fourth Sefer, in which we are also going to be starting the fifth Sefer, especially when it falls out, as we said, in the fifth month. We're already in Chodesh Av, which emphasizes the strength of the future Beis HaMikdash and Geula, that it's not only a third Geula, but also a fourth or even a fifth Geula. In other words, it's something that's completely higher than all of the divisions of the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, the first Geula and the second Geula. We're standing by a level that's going to be beyond all of that. We need to emphasize specifically the Nakuda of Achdus, the idea of unity beyond any sort of separation and division. And the Rebbe says practically this comes through following the way of Aaron, whose histalkus is b'chodesh hachamishi bi'echad lachodesh, as the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, that we should be from the Talmidim of Aaron, oyev shalim, v'roidiv shalim, oyev esabriya yisum mekarvon latoira, by revealing the Nakuda, this point of Achdus, of unity, that goes beyond division. Says the Rebbe more specifically, by looking carefully at the wording of the Mishnah, Havei mi talmidiv shel Aaron. First of all, the Rebbe says, what does Havei mean? It's a command. It's not just telling us how it's a way of acting al pi midas chassidus, beyond the letter of the law, as some of the things in Masechta Avos. Rather, Havei means it's a command, it's an order, it's ha'irah. Furthermore, the Rebbe says that the word Havei also includes giving us the koiches and the ability to be able to do it, to be a Talmud of Aaron. Point number two, the Rebbe says Talmidav shel Aaron is in plural. It doesn't say Talmidoi, it says Talmidov. That is, that the way to do this avodah is together with other people, and in that way you also get the additional advantage of Kinas Soifrim Tarbe Chochma. When you see somebody else doing something good and you try to copy, that jealousy between Talmidei Chachamim adds and increases in Chachma. Tarbe, the Rebbe says, means in a way of bligvul, not only beyond your own limitations, as is sometimes explained in Chassidus, that B'chol Moedecha means beyond your own limitation, even though compared to somebody else maybe it might not be so great. But real bligvul means even compared to everybody else. Mitalmidov in plural of Aaron. In other words, each person really going completely beyond himself in this avodah. This is connected to the real bligvul of the Eibishter. Says the Rebbe, and to emphasize the connection between Avas Yisrael and the Geula Ha'asida is not only because the way to get rid of the Golus is by getting rid of the cause of Golus, which came because of the opposite of Avas Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, now that we are standing ready after having completed all of our avodah in the whole time of Golus, after the end of, so to speak, the 42 journeys, like the Yidden had 42 journeys in the Midbar, so generally all the Yidden and Golus are also having 42 journeys through the Midbar of the nations. We're standing already, like by the end of the 42 journeys, it says that the Yidden were al Yardin Yerechoi. Literally, this means by the Yardin near Yerichoi, but this is also a hint to the Darga of Mashiach. The Yerechoi is in the word of Reach. Mashiach is going to smell, and in that way paskin. So we're standing right at the threshold of the Geula, so surely we've done already everything to fix up the cause of the Golus. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the emphasis of Avas Yisrael now is more as a taste and a beginning of the Geula Ha'amitis V'Ashleima, which is connected to the idea of Achdus that goes beyond division, which is emphasized through the unity of Yidden, coming from their Yechidah, that level of Achamishis, which exists by all Yidden equally. This Yechidah, that's the spark of the Neshama of Mashiach, the general Yechidah. And the Rebbe says, based on this, we can now give a further pshat in the word of Mekarvon La Torah. Generally, it says, Oyev Sabriyas or Mekarvon La Torah, bring Yidden closer to Torah. But here it also brings bringing them closer to the learning of Torah, of the Geula Ha'asida, the new dimensions of Torah, which will be revealed when Mashiach comes. Says the Rebbe in Sefer Daled, we can connect this also to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos of the Shabbos. Reb Shimon Oimer, Havei Zoyer b'Kriyas Shema of a Tefillah, to be careful with Kriyas Shema and davening. Says the Rebbe, Reb Shimon over here is Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, that's mentioned in the previous Mishnah. He's one of the 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which the Mishnah speaks about all 5 Talmidim, and then comes the saying of each one of these 5 Talmidim. Hey, Mamru Shloisha Dvarim, that they each said 3 things, etc. The Mishnah says Reb Shimon Oimer, It doesn't say Reb Shimon ben Nesanel Omer. It just says Reb Shimon Omer, because this is also coming as a hint that it's that this Reb Shimon is also connected to the idea of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Because usually when it says Reb Shimon, it actually refers to Reb Shimon ben Yochai. So here it just says plain Reb Shimon. It is referring to Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, but it's coming to hint that there's a certain similarity between him and Rashbi. What was Rashbi? And in a similar way, this is Reb Shimon ben Nesanel. Torah was his only occupation, including, of course, learning Pnimiyas Torah. Rashbi was the master of the Zoyar, but in a similar way, Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, the Gemara says, Pasach b'Maisim Merkava, was speaking about, he opened up to talk about Maisim Merkava, the things of Kabbalah, etc. What does Reb Shimon say? Have a Zoyar b'Kriya Shema with Tefillah, be careful with Kriya Shema with Tefillah. Now, seemingly, you could ask, a person that's Torah Yom Naseh should have been emphasizing Limud HaTorah, learning of Torah. So the Rebbe explains, because this sort of conduct of someone learning Torah to such an extent that wouldn't even have to stop for Kriya Shema and Tefillah, that's only Shayach the Yechidi Zgula to special individuals, even amongst those that Torah Yom Naseh. And therefore, Reb Shimon has to give a general instruction to his Talmidim and all the Bnei Yisrael that you need to be careful in Kriya Shema and in Tefillah, as explained in other sichos of the Rebbe more at length. But the Rebbe over here is being medayek, is looking more particularly at the word Zohir, B'Kriya Shema of Tefillah. What does it mean, Zohir? Literally, Zohir means careful. But the Rebbe says that the word Zohir could also be coming from the word Zoyar, which means light and shining, as in the pasuk Zoyar Harakia, the brightness of the sky. That is, even though usually light is associated with Torah oir, and especially when a person is learning Torah as his only occupation, so then definitely his whole mitzias, his whole existence is Torah oir, is all light. Nevertheless, Rab Shimon is coming and being mishtadel, he's also putting in the effort for those Yidden that didn't get to the level of Torah Yom Naseh, that even they should have light. Their life should be illuminated. How could they do it? Through Kriya Shema and Tefillah. Eventually they can also come to the light of Torah Yom Naseh. And this is similar to the Mishnah we spoke about before, that we need to bring close even those people that are on a lowly level. Maybe they're only briyos. The only thing you could say about them is they're creations from Hashem. And yet, even for these people, we need to bring them the light of Torah. Says the Rebbe V'Yeshloimar that this special hero and the sinas koyach for being careful in bringing light and Kriya Shema and Tefillah through Reb Shimon, who's Torah Yom Naseh, is, in other words, Reb Shimon is coming along, and because he is Torah Yom Naseh, he is bringing that light from the Torah and bringing it in to Kriya Shema and Tefillah. So what does this mean? So similar to what we said before, it's like taking that darga which is higher than division, the light that is beyond separation, and causing that even in a world where there's two different types of avodah, a maila and a mata, avodah of Torah and Tefillah, he is bringing in that they should be able to combine even the avodah of the light of Torah should also be able to come into the area of Tefillah. Says the Rebbe V'Yeshlohis, if we could add that within Limudat Torah itself, there's really also two ways, similar to Amshocha and Hala, of drawing down and going up. As it's known, the saying of the Tzaddik, Harav Tzaddik, Reb Hillel Miparich, regarding the Chassidus of the Tzemach Tzedek, and of course the same thing applies to all of the Rabbeim. Maybe I'll just first say the story, even though it doesn't bring the story right over here, but the Rebbe on a number of occasions mentioned the story. The Frierdiker Rebbe tells the story in the Sichos. The story was that the Tzemach Tzedek one time said a mimer. After the mimer, there was a discussion between Reb Hillel Paritcher and somebody else about the pshat and the mimer. There was a disagreement. They went to the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek had agreed with the other person against Reb Hillel Paritcher. And Reb Hillel Paritcher's response sort of to that was, he says, when the Rebbe says a mimer, that's like the Torah coming from Har Sinai. Obviously there's no arguing and no discussions then. But after the Rebbe says the mimer, when the Rebbe is saying pshat in the mimer, well, the Rebbe is saying his pshat, but sort of there's still room for another pshat as well. Everyone has to understand it in their own way. So back to our sikha now, what the Reb Hillel Paritcher said, that saying the mimer is like Shechina Medaberes Mitech Groiner, like given from Har Sinai. Whereas when the Maimer is being explained, the discussion in the Maimer, even by the one who said the Maimer, by the Rebbe who said the Maimer, but it's now after the Maimer. That's already another level. He's discussing the Maimer. That's more like Mulmata L'mayla. In other words, in Torah itself, you have these two ways. One is coming from above, Mulmayla L'mata, like coming from Har Sinai. The second is coming from below, like discussing within the Seichel of the person, the understanding of the Torah. And this is similar to the general difference between Torah and Tefillah. Torah more coming from above, and Tefillah coming from below. Says the Rebbe in Seif Tezvav. All of the above has also a connection to that thing that has man groma that's very timely right now, that is making siyumim during the 9 days. The Rebbe says, in addition to the general minig of making siyumim in the 9 days in order to add in simcha of Torah, as is Pkudei Hashem Yishara Misamche Leiv, make a simcha for finishing inyan in Torah. In a similar way, by a siyum of a Masechta, as the Gemara says, that one of the Amoyroim was Abaye, said that when I see a Talmud Chacham finishing a Masechta, you make a big yomtiv for the Chachamim. In addition to that, there's also need to add the inyan of tzedakah, as the pasuk says, "Tzion b'mishpati pada v'shaveh b'tzedakah." That's both the areas of Torah and tzedakah that brings the Geula closer. But in addition to all of that, we need to try this year specifically making siyumim b'roivam hadras melech, to unite many people together, many yidden together in the simcha of completing in Yom of Torah, including even little children. Not only children in the sense of knowledge, but also even physically children in years. Even those that are not shaykh to understanding yet should also be participating in the siyumim. The Rebbe says similar to the idea of making a siyum on Erev Pesach, that the minhag Yisrael is to also bring the b'chorim, even of little children, even the little children. The Rebbe says lahoyer, to note that this similarity with Erev Pesach and the Siyum is not just an example, but actually is very much connected to the idea of the Siyumim of the 9 days. Why is that? Because the Siyum of Erev Pesach is a preparation to Pesach, to the Geula of Mitzrayim, to the Geula of Pesach. The Siyumim that we're making in the 9 days are the Achana to the Geula Asida, which, as the Pasuk says, Kimei Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Arenu Niflois. And even more emphasized this year, the year that's Hoyet Ha'ishnas, our Enu Niflois, when we're standing right at the threshold of the Geula. Says the Rebbe in Sif Tezayin V'Hiratzen, that speaking and making Achlatos Toivus and all of the above should hasten and bring even closer and bring practically and Begili Mamish the strength of the Geula Shlishis, the third Geula and the third Beis HaMikdash. And simply, that in addition to the fact that we completed already all 42 journeys in the Midbar Amim, in the desert of the nations in the time of Golus, and we're standing already al Yarden Yerechoi on the eastern side of the Yarden. So we cross over into the western side of the Yarden, going into Eretz Yisrael, and in Eretz Yisrael itself we go further west, further Ma'ariv, towards Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, and the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, all the way to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is in the Ma'ariv, in the west of the Beis HaMikdash, the place where the Orin and the Luchis are. For those that are resting in the dust will get up and sing. And Moshe and Aharon, the one who's the Bala Ilula of Rosh Chodesh Menachemov, along with all the Yidden and all of the Tzaddikim and all of the Nisiyei Yisrael along with them. And Kavoid, Kedushas, Moiri V'chami, Admunus Sidereinu along with them, together with Neshamis Begufim, the Neshamis in bodies of all the Bnei Yisrael of this generation, with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters. As the Pasuk says, V'atem Kaluk, to all Yidden will be collected, gathered one by one, each and every Yid. And all together we'll learn the Torah Chadashim Iti Teitzei, the Eila HaDvarim Asher Diber Moshe, like the Pasuk says in the beginning of Dvarim, that these are the words that Moshe Rabbeinu said, and we know that Goyal Rishon u Goyal Achroin. So these are the words that Moshe Rabbeinu, and so to Mashiach teaches to all of the Yidden. And Eila is something that you could point with your finger to, and say Eila, that it's here already practically in a revealed way, and take it from Miyad Mamsh.